Welcome to the Mindfulness and Meditation Summit, a free online event where you'll receive heartfelt guidance from leaders in the mindfulness field to help you fortify and balance mind, body, and spirit. Share this powerful event with your friends and family, and come join us on Facebook at the Shift Network. And now your host, Deborah Tull.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And I am so excited to introduce our special guest today, Lama Rod Owens. Lama Rod Owens is considered one of the leaders of his generation of Buddhist teachers. He is the author of Love and Rage, The Path of Liberation Through Anger, the co-author of Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Liberation, and Love, and the founder of the Bhumisparsha Tantric Practice Community. Today's topic is Mourning Utopia, letting go of the idealized past and leaning into the truth of the moment and beyond. So welcome, Lama Rod.
Thank you so much, Eden, for having me on.
I would like to begin our conversation today by inviting you to share a bit about your personal path, how you came to practice, how you came to be a Dharma teacher.
So I began practicing in my early 20s. I was moving through a series of severe depression, or just a period of severe clinical depression. I'd been in therapy and just really wasn't finding that to be helpful. So I just kind of opened my mind and started doing research on my own. So I was really interested in different modalities, different approaches to working with mental illness. I talked with lots of people. I researched medication, all kinds of things. And then eventually a friend introduced me to a healer. And I began to, study with her and take sessions with her. And she encouraged me to meditate as part of this natural holistic path towards healing. So I started meditation, and really, I'd been practicing meditation before then, but when I started studying with this healer, it really took on a different dimension for me. I really found a lot of support. I found a depth in my practice that I didn't have before. And this was combined with all kinds of things, with nutrition, with exercise, with a range of lifestyle changes. And as I moved through the treatment and got better, I really found that I wanted to deepen my meditation. So I started hanging around with my Buddhist friends and going to meditation retreats, week-long meditation retreats, weekend retreats, and slowly began to become interested in Vajrayana Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, which was the kind of Buddhism that I was surrounded by. All of my friends practiced Tibetan Buddhism. And I really found it to be a really powerful fit. And then I just decided, it just became clear that I was meant to train in this tradition and to become a teacher. So I entered into a 3-year retreat. And after I completed that retreat, I was authorized as a teacher, or a Lama, and Lama means teacher in Tibetan. And so I've been teaching ever since. And it's been about 9 years.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I want to presence the fact that right now, especially in this moment, we are finding ourselves in a moment of tremendous change and potential for change in our world. The topic that we're looking at today is Mourning Utopia. So I would love to ask you to speak for a few minutes about how mourning, how grieving is a radical act.
Yeah, one of the first things I want to point out is that utopia doesn't exist. Utopia actually means, it actually, the word utopia means that it means nowhere. And so I think that sometimes we get fixated on perfection, on a reality or a situation that's somehow super, super, pleasant and fun and nice and so forth. But we have to actually come into a reality that recognizes that our basic situation is quite mixed. There are really great times, really balanced times, or there are times that are really quite uncomfortable, and full of suffering. And we have to enter into a relationship with that truth that holds the reality, the complete, complex reality of the experiences that we can have. So I think about right now, I think about this present time of pandemic, of war, of crime, of violence. And for me, my mourning practice is the recognition that, the things that I'm experiencing are really hard and confusing, and I don't really understand it. But what I know is that I have to show up to experiencing the sadness, despair, the hopelessness. And that experiencing helps me to process through these difficult emotions. And that processing actually introduces me to this wide open kind of spaciousness that helps me to really hold everything. It helps me to hold both the pleasantness and also the discomfort. And that actually becomes my ideal reality, is when I have the space to hold everything. And then I can use the spaciousness to give rise to joy and happiness and gratitude, love and kindness and generosity. And all of those qualities actually function along with space to hold the really difficult things, So I can be in this time right now. I can be in this period in quarantine and just being really uncertain and confused about my future, but I can still experience spaciousness because I've done this work of touching into the grief beneath all of this, and I've allowed the grief to surface within this experience of space. And so I have the space to be in a relationship with all this uncomfortable material, but still have access to happiness, still have access to moments of joy, still have access to gratitude, and I can still, speaking of gratitude, I can still experience gratitude in the midst of really hard experiences. So for me in my personal practice, I guess to sum it up, I would say that for me, I've had to let go of the ideal in order to move into a relationship with what is actually happening, And for me, what is actually happening is this point of freedom, is this point of letting go of this idealized present to embrace the actuality of the moment. And that's nothing but liberating for me.
Thank you. There is so much richness in what you're sharing. And so I just want to underline that piece that you named, the invitation of practice to really learn to rest and hang out in the spaciousness that can hold everything, the spaciousness that can hold everything. And that in order to let ourselves rest in that space, we need to first let go of and allow ourselves to grieve the utopia or nowhere real that we were actually attached to in our minds. Maybe the idea of how we should be other than how we are, or how life should be other than how it is, and what a lot of suffering is in that. So the next thing that I want to ask you is, how would you encourage for the people listening today, whether they're newer to practice or deepening a long time practice, to deepen their relationship with this space that can hold everything?
Right.
Rod, I'm sorry, real quick. Sorry to interrupt. Can you, when you put your hands up, sometimes you catch your earbud.
Uh-huh.
And if you keep it outside, it was scratching up against your beard.
Oh, okay.
When you caught it on the other side.
Okay.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Yeah, one of the things that I would tell folks is that whatever you're experiencing, you're supposed to be experiencing, right? So it is not extraordinary that that we are experiencing sadness and despair or hopelessness, or we're experiencing a loss of motivation, or we're experiencing fear. All of this is part of the work of coming into a more balanced, direct relationship with how things are actually, happening, and coming into a relationship with the way things are, are actually happening for us, right? So this is something I wish people would have told me at the beginning of my practice. This is a piece of advice that I wish I would have heard, that whatever you're experiencing, you're supposed to experience, and that the practice is to open up to that, and so this is a tough period to really start digging into a meditation practice, because there's a lot of uncomfortable material to work with, because it's not just our own personal experience, that we're wrestling with. We're actually having to engage with a collective experience. Like, this is the whole world moving through fear, anxiety, despair, sadness. So we have both a personal and a collective experience. And one of the teachings that I've received from, one of my teachers is that we have to practice in such a way that we begin to consume the chaos, to consume the chaos. And so I practice that by first noticing and recognizing everything that I'm experiencing. And then I move into a relationship with what I've noticed, a kind of relationship where I am learning how to accept what I'm noticing, right? And so acceptance means that I allow it to be there. So when I'm working with my sadness or frustration, I notice the sadness, the frustration, and then I accept it. I let it be there. And I say, you know what? There you are. Here you are, right? You're not a figment of my imagination. You are actually something that's happening in my mind. You're something that's happening within the minds of countless beings in the world. I notice you and I accept you and I allow you to be there. In that moment of allowing this discomfort to be there, that's when the spaciousness comes back into focus, And as the spaciousness comes back into focus, I'm actually able to journey into a deeper relationship with this discomfort, right? With my frustration and sadness. I'm able to be in a relationship with it that feels non-judgmental, right? So that basic acceptance also means that I'm not judging it. I'm not even labeling it right or wrong or good or bad or pleasant or unpleasant. I'm just saying, oh, there's this frustration and sadness. There it is, And then once I move more into the spaciousness and more of the acceptance and more of the non-judgmental presence, then I'm actually able to invest more practice in experiencing, right? So many of us don't really experience the material in our minds, right? Most of us are really busy reacting to it. We're busy running away from it, or we're busy getting swallowed in by it, right? But to experience means that, like, I just get really curious about what this experience of frustration and sadness is. What does it feel like in my mind? What does it feel like as a physical sensation? What are all the composite experiences of my frustration and sadness that I've never been aware of until now? Now that I have the space, now that I have this accepting, non-judgmental attitude towards it, I can actually move deeper into it to really understand what the nature of these things are. And this is all about consuming. I am consuming the discomfort. I'm consuming the chaos by giving it space and getting curious about what the actual nature of this material is.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love about what you just shared, it's a teaching on consuming the chaos, consuming and fully being with one's naked experience, but not so much being a consumer of the conditioned mind, of all the ideas, and as you said, the good, bad, right, wrong, I can stand this, I can't stand this, there's something wrong, that gets layered on top of our actual experience. So such a beautiful reminder to everyone for how to, because you gave a very practical how to, turn towards and consciously allow and be with an accepting way our actual experience of life. So the next thing I would love to ask you is, especially in a world that has such an aversion towards difficult emotion and grief, and in my experience as one who has walked with grief, a lot of non-allowance for grief. Can you talk about what is collective grieving and the need and importance of collective mourning?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think collectively we have a lot of unmetabolized grief in the world. And this unmetabolized grief is grief that we experience, not just in like our personal experiences, but we experience like the grief of the earth. You know, we talk about climate change. I think that's, you know, related to grief and trauma that the earth has experienced, you know, and that grief and trauma also is directly related to the grief and the trauma that we as humans have experienced, you know, and passed on through the earth through different actions and behaviors. Collective grieving is also important because we all have to do, well, first of all, we have to do our individual work of grieving and metabolizing the grief in the exact same way I mentioned before in terms of being with material in our minds. We have to do our own work, you know, and then as we do our own work, then we actually inspire others to do their work as well. Until this collective grieving starts, like we will be swimming, I think, in a sea of unmetabolized grief and also unmetabolized trauma, and that trauma will continue to impact our mental health, our physical health. It will continue to impact the earth. It will continue to impact our relationships. It will continue to breed systems of violence and inequality. It will continue to breed fear and isolation and paranoia. And we know that like these are the things, these qualities of paranoia, fear, distrust, actually create this unity that creates a split in community and collective, you know, collective organizing and collective harmony. And I would say also that the importance of collective grieving, you know, it's about relying on others to help us to hold what I call our broken heart. You know, I think that I would argue that all beings, all humans, experience brokenheartedness. And that brokenheartedness for me is a composite experience, which includes sadness and despair and hopelessness and loss of motivation and so forth. But there's this kind of personal experience of brokenheartedness where ultimately, basically, it's the sadness maybe that we experience because we can't actually experience the world and our circumstances in the exact way that we want them to be experienced. Like we have to live in a world where we are of the nature to get sick. We are of the nature to die. We are of the nature to experience pain and suffering and other discomfort. We are of the nature to experience fear and insecurity and hunger. You know, we are of the nature to be hurt. You know, we have to allow ourselves to experience the brokenheartedness around that. And we have to learn how to let that brokenheartedness be there, to give it space, and then to allow our joy and happiness and gratitude and generosity and kindness and so forth and so on, to allow those qualities along with spaciousness to hold that brokenheartedness. And we have to do that together as a collective. We do our individual work, but we come together because we can support one another in doing this kind of grieving together. It's hard. Like particularly in this country, in America, we have such an intense relationship with individualism. We have these cultural narratives around like independence and like pulling oneself up by your own bootstraps, you know, those kinds of narratives, which are counter to collective healing, collective organizing. Collective healing means that we come together, we mourn together, and I think as we move deeper into this period and as we begin to think about a future, perhaps beyond this epidemic pandemic, what we have to start thinking about is the work of grieving. We have to, our institutions and systems have to be reorganized to support and encourage both individual and collective grieving, because it will be imperative that becomes our main work to do. If we don't make it that our main work, we actually won't progress or move out of the state of grief and trauma.
This is so important. And as I hear you first talking about unmetabolized grief and all the ways that then, in a sense, becomes a toxin that causes harm within and out in our world, I hear you pointing to like a sense of joyful responsibility for taking responsibility for mourning and processing our unmetabolized grief, and for doing so together to mourn our shared broken heart instead of the mourning of my individual alone broken heart. And there's so much in that I'm very present to right now. So many of the wisdom traditions of our world, including shamanism, that point to healing has to happen in community together. We wake up through Dharma practice together. So I'm feeling very inspired, and I wonder if you would be willing to speak for a few minutes about, in your personal life experience, on your personal path, maybe one point or a couple of points that feel potent to you around processing your own unmetabolized grief and then the liberation that you got to experience.
And Eden, I think so much of my personal practice has been so much about metabolizing grief. Before coming into, my Dharma practice, my Buddhist practice, I was an activist, and I still am an activist, but I came out of and still am very much a part of this kind of Black radical prophetic tradition. And early, in my activism, from my early years, in my adolescence and moving to my teenage years, I was so tuned into and aware of the trauma and the pain around systematic racism above other systems of violence, but like definitely racism, institutionalized racism, systematic racism, I experience as deep trauma, deep sadness, deep woundedness. And I think that really fed into my experience of severe depression. And so when I came into practice, really understanding that I had to decenter comforts and to begin to center discomfort, because I had to move into relationship with the things that I was habitually avoiding. And I had to be in a relationship with the trauma, the pain, the woundedness, because I had to do this work of metabolizing. So early in my practice, it was just a lot of sitting through the discomfort, sitting through the pain, sitting through the trauma, giving everything space, getting curious about everything, really understanding that discomfort wasn't like the boogeyman. Discomfort wasn't like something that bad people experience, but discomfort was something that humans experience. And that as I was metabolizing through this discomfort, I was actually becoming more human. And this kind of metabolizing, this mourning or this grieving, is something that I do every single day. I call it skillful mourning. Skillful mourning is something that I incorporate into my practice. Each day I have designed practices around skillful mourning, and the very same practices that I've been sharing in this talk. I intentionally move into a space of mourning because I know that it is so easy for grief to build up in my experience, in my system. And when it gets really strong, I know that I start reacting to it in ways that can be harmful or painful for myself and for others around me, you know? So one of the points that, I would really suggest for folks is to build skillful mourning into your practice, and this is a good time to do it. To kind of begin to open our hearts, to open our minds to the discomfort, to the fear, the sadness, to everything that that's opening up right now in our world. To not run away from it, but to move into it, but to hold that process with lots of space, with lots of love, with lots of gentleness, with lots of kindness. And then the second point, too, is that this is also the time that we should be contemplating death. Death, dying, and impermanence. In Buddhism, impermanence is one of one of the most important things that we should be turning our minds into, right? And nothing says impermanence like growing older and dying, right? Nothing says impermanence like being well one week and dying the next, as we're seeing so often these days, right? Nothing says impermanence than to remember, December and to find ourselves in May in a world that's completely changed, And so we bring our practice into contemplating how things are always changing and ultimately how I will die, and that is another heartbreak that we have to hold space for, is the heartbreak of my own mortality, and to begin to really have a practice around death and dying, we actually have to develop a practice around living. And the only way to develop a practice around living is to begin to come into relationship with reality as it really is, with the complexity of reality, with both the joy and the sadness together, to give both of those things space to be in our experience, to accept them. And then and that space helps us to be in a closer relationship with those things. And then that prepares us to die, because we, as we're moving closer to death, and, of course, no one really has a clear picture of when they die. We're not often given like the precise moment and second, Of course, yes, many of us do have, prognoses that, indicate, maybe, that we will be passing at a certain point. But for the most part, we don't get like an exact date. So we can die at any moment. But to live means that we're actually able to move into death, with the same methods and pedagogies that we developed in life. So basically, another way to say all of that is that, the more I show up to everything in my experience while I'm living, the easier it is to show up to the experience of death at the moment death arises for us, because death becomes just a reflection of the same material that we've been working to be in a relationship during our living. So we begin to see death as just another expression of the material in our minds, right? And personally, my personal view around death is that death is just a continuation into something else, right? Death isn't an ending, but the more I'm able to live fully in the actuality of the moment, the more possible it is for me to meet my death with the same openness, lovingness, spaciousness, and curiosity that helps me to move through whatever I think death is in the moment into the next continuation of my journey.
Thank you. Yeah. In what you're saying, I want to underline just for our listeners, first, the piece that you named about learning to decenter comfort from our practice and really turn towards and welcome discomfort as a portal. Such an important teaching. And then in what you've been sharing about cultivating a practice for how we live, which also informs how we die, such an important offering and remembrance in this time. I guess along those lines, Rod, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how people listening can bring and find more acceptance to that which is unfolding through the pandemic, and specifically the fact that some people will make it okay and many people will lose their lives, their peace of mind, people already losing their jobs, and for some mental stability. Can you speak about how everyone can bring more acceptance to what is unfolding in the bigger picture?
Yeah, I would say that we have to let go of this idea of fairness. When I was growing up, I would complain about something happening in my life, and my mom would be like, "Well, life isn't fair," and I would get so frustrated when, I was told that, from my mom. I was like, it's just like it felt like a bypass. It was like, it felt like we were kind of bypassing the fact that there are things happening to me or things happening to other people that just wasn't right, And so as I got older, and particularly once I got deeper into my practice, I really began to have a much more mature relationship with that. And that relationship really helped me to see that, it's not about fairness, but it was about something else. It was about everything that I experienced being mine to experience, right? Everything that I went through was somehow part of a lesson. It was part of a journey. It was part of the way in which my wisdom, compassion, love, generosity was being deepened, and how everyone was receiving different lessons and teachings about how to do that. And so when I think about now, I would just, from that sharing, I would go on to say that, everyone is experiencing what they need to experience, that that some people will die, but that's their path. Some people will survive, and that's their path. And the point of a spiritual path is to meet whatever we're given, with a sense of openness and generosity, and with a sense of knowing that this is part of a higher plan, a grander path or a longer path. I talk about utopia, but I also talk about the apocalypse. This is a moment of the apocalypse. This is an experience of apocalypse. I don't know if it's the apocalypse, but this is apocalypse means that the apocalypse means unveiling. So apocalypse means truth telling, and so there are many things breaking down and falling away and dying because there's a truth that's emerging. And our work is to try to be in relation to that truth, in relationship to that truth. Not everyone will be able to be in relationship to that truth. So when I say that people aren't going to make it, that some people won't make it through this apocalyptic moment, what I mean is that there are people who won't be able to deal with the basic ground level truth of reality, the basic ground level truth of life and living, and the basic ground level truth of any kind of ultimate meaning, ultimate or divine meaning. So if we die, it doesn't mean that we haven't made it through this period, because death, again, is a continuation where it's just another path moving us somewhere else. But we don't make it when we don't accept it. So if I die, if I get sick and die, I have to move through that process with openness and acceptance and understanding that I am continuing. If I can do that, I'm still moving forward during this period, and it's the same thing with those who will remain well or will recover. It's about acceptance and opening and learning the truth of our experience, or learning the wisdom, actually, from what we go through. And that helps us to move through this moment. But the people who won't make it are the ones who won't be able to open up to the truth of the moment. They won't be able to learn the lessons from what's happening. They won't be able to do the grieving and the mourning to release and metabolize this really toxic energy. And if they don't do that, then they get stuck in a different reality. And I've been seeing this happen well before the pandemic, where we tend to be living in a world, and I'll speak more directly about living in the United States. Living here, it just seems like people are experiencing different realities. There are people who refuse to grow, who refuse to move on, who refuse to allow their beliefs, their opinions to change, to shift. So that's one group of people. Then there's another group of people who are really involved in the changing and trying to understand truth and trying to live lives that are, much more concerned about the collective. Those are the folks who will make it. Those are the folks who will be moving on. It doesn't matter if folks in this group continue in this life or if they die, right? They are still continuing the basic work of opening their hearts, accepting, and changing and evolving and moving on. Where the other group, they're kind of stuck. They'll get stuck in the past. They'll get stuck in a different reality. And their experience of suffering and discomfort will begin to compound, and deepen. And that, of course, creates the potential for much more harm to happen in their lives and to happen within the lives of others around them.
Yes, thank you, and well said. I think in a couple of minutes, I'd like to invite you to guide us through a short practice, because I think it would be so useful for everyone in this time. But first, I just want to ask one more question, and I want to acknowledge, for me, always what a gift it is just to have real conversations based in truth-telling, Dharma conversations. This is certainly something I've given my life to. Conversations where we can show up as we are, perfectly imperfect human beings, and talk about what's real and what's difficult. And I wonder if you can offer any encouragement to people listening regarding how to have more conversations based on truth-telling and being together with what is messy and difficult in their lives.
Yes. I think one of the main things that I will offer is to let go of an agenda, to let go of some kind of expected outcome. I think so often we enter into conversations with a lot of goals. Like, we want the conversation to go a certain way. We need this to happen. We need the other person to say this and that, and that actually takes us away out of the dynamic truth-telling that can happen. The kind of dynamic truth-telling that happens when we allow people just to be themselves, and we allow ourselves to be ourselves, and we enter into this kind of freedom together in conversation, and whatever happens is going to happen, from the conversation, and we have to be willing to have messy conversations that won't feel good, they won't look good, and potential conversations that, may deeply hurt and impact really important relationships to folks around us, and so we have to hold all of that, we have to have conversations that censor discomfort, and we have to hold space for all of that. My first primary teacher, what I would call my root teacher, in my lineage, used to say, whatever happens, happens, whatever comes, comes. I don't need anything at all. And that teaching has been a teaching that I've been coming to over and over again, multiple times a day, particularly as we've set through the quarantine here. This is a teaching that, has helped me to move through these moments of deep insecurity, has helped me to have these conversations, to have these teachings, to start speaking about apocalypse, to start speaking about letting go of this idea of utopia. It's helped me to have the courage to talk about grief and trauma, and letting go of all my expectations. I know there are people who will listen to this and they will be like, I just don't need to hear this. I'm not interested in this. This is overwhelming. I can't deal with this. And I say, okay, that's fine, because whatever happens, happens, and whatever comes, comes. I have everything that I need. And because of that security, I'm able to step in to have these conversations. And this is what it means to practice prophecy, and I come from the Black prophetic tradition. And so what that has always meant is that you tell the truth of what you're seeing. Like you're telling, as we say in the community, we tell the times. Like we tell the times. We're time tellers. So we look into the world, we look into society, we look into ourselves, and we articulate what we're seeing. And that articulation doesn't often feel good. It's not comfortable, but it's the truth, of the vision, and that's what I need at the end of the day. Whatever happens, happens, wherever comes, comes. I know that I am doing everything that I can possibly do to be in a relationship with the truth. And to use this cliche, the truth will set us free. But the truth will set us free. We can't get liberated without telling the truth.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Before we bring this session to a close, Rod, would love for you to guide us in maybe just a short 3-minute practice.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, I would like to share just a short practice called the Four Naturals. So I hope this is beneficial. So we'll just begin, just be really informal. And I always begin by just bringing attention to my body. I'm just noticing how my body is arranged. I am allowing myself, to have a body, which is a strange thing to say. But initially, I'm just saying, you know what? There's a body here, and this is my body, and I have an experience of the body. So I just let my body be here. I don't change it. I don't rearrange it. And this is my natural body. I just let my body be in the moment. And now I shift my attention to my breath. I notice my in breath. I notice my out breath. And I leave my breath alone and just simply let it breathe. There is a breath there. And this is my natural breath. Now I shift my attention into my mind. So I'm noticing thoughts and emotions. I can name thoughts and emotions. I can label them. And I'm just allowing my thoughts and emotions, all the material in my mind, to simply be there. And this is my natural mind. And all together, my mind, my breath, my body combine together to create my natural self. As I notice my natural self, I accept this natural self and allow it space to be in my experience of self. And I just rest my mind within the spaciousness of this naturally occurring self. There's nothing to hold on to, but just an experience of self, this natural experience of self. So as we come out of the practice, coming back and resting for as long as you can within this sense of authenticity, naturalness, spaciousness, deep acceptance. And this is an experience that we can come back to over and over again, really in the midst of chaos and upset. In the midst of a world that seems to be falling apart, we can come back to the body. We can come back to the breath. We can come back to our mind. And we can notice and accept this sense of self that doesn't have to be solid and fixed, but that can be spacious and luminous, settling and foundational. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lama Rod. It was so wonderful to be here with you and your huge heart today. For people who want to go deeper with Lama Rod, to check out his books and his teachings, visit his website, lamarod.com. And thank you so much for listening today.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining the Mindfulness and Meditation Summit, brought to you by the Shift Network. To learn more, visit mindfulnessmeditationsummit.com. To learn more about our global programs to support you in waking up in all the areas of your life and taking inspired action, visit theshiftnetwork.com. Thank you again for joining us and for sharing these resilience-building practices with your friends and family.